Hello students, and welcome back to Lore of the Iron Kingdoms with me, Professor Caster. And for everybody that does not know, or for all of us new students out there, we go over the lore of the tabletop war game of Warmachine and the role-playing game of the Iron Kingdoms, respectively. So, without further ado, for everybody that showed up to class, thank you guys for showing up. And if you guys are enjoying any of these videos, please like, subscribe, and let your friends and fellow gamers know about this channel so we can continue to increase the class size and keep this Steam train rolling. Also, another thank you to Steamforge Games for letting me continue to read their fantastic lore. And without further ado, we will be discussing the history of the Cryx, the Nightmare Empire, and whatever other dark analogies these guys like to be called, because of course they are a complete nation based on undead, necromancers, and the like. And we hopefully will be able to just do this in one part, but we might have to break it into two parts because of course every history of each faction, especially the original Iron Kingdoms factions, all the robotic ones, are extremely long since they were part of the original group. But without further ado, let's begin. Military of the Cryxian Empire, the claws of the Dragonfather. For centuries, outsiders have had little awareness of the true power of the Nightmare Empire. To the nations of the mainland, Cryx is little more than a mysterious source of unease. The dragon god Torok created the empire to serve his needs and spent over a millennium shaping it into a weapon that he could extend his reach across the continent. Mainlanders knew horrors lurked on these islands and therefore avoided them. But they had little contact with the Cryxians beyond brutal clashes with inhuman pirates and reaving dead. Survivors spoke of the dread vessels that blazed with an unholy and unquenchable fire, and a strange soul-burning machines that emerged from the waves to slaughter before disappearing back into the mists. As terrifying as these attacks were, they occurred rarely enough that afterwards the people of the Iron Kingdoms reacted as they might a bad dream dispelled by the comings of dawn. The next day there was nothing to be done except rebuild and start fresh while nervously watching the ever-changing sea. The apparent randomness of these attacks amplified the terror they inspired, but over generations, it also disguised the scope of Cryxian machinations. Isolated coastal villages and ships at sea might suffer atrocities, but most inhabitants of the mainland dismissed this as a distant danger. What their limited perspectives could not perceive was the great plan lay behind these movements, and even the smallest coastal raids was carefully orchestrated by the tireless Lich Lords, undead rulers chosen directly by Lord Torok to supervise his empire and control his armies. Possessing vast intelligence and patience beyond that of any living thing, even today the Lords of Cryx have no interest in traditional conquest. Lord Torok's only desire is the destruction of his progeny. Coastal raids are but deceptions to mask greater troop movements and incursions by which the Dragonfather's minions are planted deep within the mainland. In time, his armies will arise and lay waste to the petty kingdoms of humanity, enslaving them in death and preparing the army for his final victory. Once the nations of men have fallen, Torok will drag his progeny from their hiding places and devour them once and for all. And before we start the next thing, we just have Cryxian military structure. How do you structure an undead army? That is the answer that we just answered today. So of course it is all controlled by Lord Torok of the Dragonfather, God of Cain, Master of the Nightmare Empire. And then I will be of course posting this up on the page so you can take a gander at it yourself and how everything is broken up, which I always find this super funny that they actually do have a military structure and it's not just a horde of undead. It's very interesting to me. So underneath Torok, of course, we have his military, foreign affairs, occult research, archive of Skell, empire, infrastructure, intelligence and stuff, because this is technically an empire, so I imagine you have to get all the nitty-gritty stuff out of the way. He has necromantic research, esoteric research, dracanic lore. War industry was led by Lord Morbus, but looks like he was killed in 608 AR. Then, of course, you have the Church of Torok, because, well, he is a dragon lord. And then we have a treasury, which is funny, but I imagine pirates that work for the Cryx, they prefer to get paid at some point, so that actually makes sense. And then, of course, we've broken down is military is the main part of this. So we got the Terminus Incursion Force, the Asphyxius Incursion Force, the Venethrax Incursion Force, and then the Cryxian Reserves. Of course, most of this is mostly hearsay, so you aren't really going to get too many numbers in this particular one, but feel free to check it out. Pause this video if you will. What is always apparent is Lord Torok being called the Dragon Father. It's not just a, not just a title or whatever. He actually is a dragon, and his children are also dragons. Looking at, Everblight and, Blighterghast and the like. Every dragon on the Iron Kingdoms is the progeny of Torok. So that is always fun. But let's get back to the history of the Army of the Dead. Torok's empire and armies have evolved over time, even as his ultimate goals has remained unchanged. When he first seized the control of the lands that would be Cryx, Torok commanded the first Lich Lords to subjugate the city-states and scatter villages of the Scarred Islands. The few that resisted were annihilated, and within days the island's population bowed before Torok's majesty. The Lich Lords immediately began laying the foundation of the Undying nations devoted utterly to the Dragon Father's design. Torok granted the Lich Lords the secrets of Thrall runes so that they could spawn undying legions in their own image. Ceremonially inscribing these runes with corpses allowed them to create servants of varying potency, with more intricate and powerful inscriptions yielding more powerful thralls. In many respects, the nature of the body itself also limits the power it could achieve. Not every corpse was suitable to contain the more powerful inscriptions. Even as mighty as the Lich Lords were, their once mortal minds could not fully comprehend the Dragon Lord's necromantic power or the scope of his immortal lore. It was left to them as the masters of this new realm to derive occult methods better suited for those like themselves and others animated dead they would subsequently create. Before long, they were able to harvest the weak flesh of the islands to create a great horde of thrall slaves and a small number of more cunning lieutenants. These simple undead were directed to construct the great cities of Skell and the Black Palace, where Torok chose to dwell and receive the worship of his fearful populace. In a short time, the eyes and ears of the Lich Lords spread even to the mainland. Their agents among humanity watched as the thousand cities fought and feuded, noting every innovation of the arts of murder and warfare. Rather than reverse engineer the inventions of the mortal hands, Cryxian agents pillaged the graves of humanity's greatest thinkers and stripped the secrets from their bones through forensic necromancy. The necromancers excelled at uncovering lore and applying the research to their own nightmarish creations. The Cryxians were willing to pursue any possible weapon for Lord Torok's final war. The great army Cryx had created remained on the islands and unknown to the people of the mainland, who saw only the occasional coastal raid, the revenant fleet of the Atramentus, and the few reavers that made their port in Blackwater and Dreg's Mouth, patrolled the waters of the broken coast but preferred to strike isolated coastal towns or treasure ships. Years passed while Torok's armies grew and his generals developed increasingly fiendish tactics. The arrival of the Orgoth on their terrifying black ships was among the few mortals' affairs ever to capture Torok's interest and forestalled the long-planned Cryxian invasion of the mainland. The Orgoth possessed a unique necromantic tradition as well as a vast wealth of powerful relics and unfamiliar lore, and they went about subduing the mainland's population with inhuman savagery. Although Torok himself laid waste to their fleets when they foolishly approached the Cryx main island, the Dragon Father allowed them to claim the island of Garglast, where his agents could easily observe them. The Orgoth ground the people of Western Emorn beneath their tyranny over the next several centuries, but eventually the oppressed rose up against them. A turning point came when the goddess Thamar granted humanity the gift of magic. Soon they were able to merge their arcane skills with technology and create the first mechanical devices. The Cryxians were immediately fascinated by these machines and envisioned necromantic equivalents. They plundered the bones of countless arcanists and set about incorporating mainland mechanical knowledge into their own morbid industries, crafting a new and unique necrotechnological tradition. Soon they mastered techniques enabling them to augment their thralls with crude steam engines, and a new era was born. The discovery of necrotite as a source of fuel provided an important breakthrough for Cryx. The Lich Lords had long experimented with methods to manipulate the energies of souls to replace or supplement coal as fuel, but those were a limited resource that was impractical for widespread use. Necrotite, a noxious combination of coal and the residue accumulated beneath battlefields and other places of suffering and slaughter, could be used to fuel mechanical apparatus and sustain intense heat far longer than regular coal. The substance is toxic to the living over extended exposure, but Cryxians do not suffer such effects. In time, they learn to refine and concentrate necrotite and develop methods for extracting it from a new battlefield, giving them a resource for powerful fuel as unending as suffering itself. Cryx took note to every weapon the Immories and Orgoth employed in their struggles for dominance. When the Iron Alliance constructed the first Colossals during the Rebellion, Cryx wasted no time in stealing the secrets of the Cerebral Matrix, the massive arcane device that served as the cortex of the titanic constructs. Theft of lore and power. Eventually the Orgoth were overthrown on the mainland and fell back to their last and greatest city, Drer Drakenrun, on the Isle of Gargast. Torok sent forth his armies en masse to wrest the remaining secrets from them. After sustaining enormous losses in the siege, the Orgoth chose self-annihilation over surrender. The resulting conflagration claimed the vast majority of the Cryxian army, destroying 3 of the 5 Lich Lords, leading the armies and inflicting losses that would have been staggering to any other nation. Torok thought nothing of these losses and was satisfied with the outcome. The Orgoth could not keep their secrets from him in death, and in time his legions would grow ever more powerful. Certain occult traditions from the Orgoth now survive only among the Cryx, such as the powerful war witches, which have become vital to Cryxian occult traditions. The mainland nations expand and improve the mechanica as they warred among themselves over several centuries after recovery from the Orgoth. Cryx observed the rise of warjacks. The smaller, more easily manufactured and controlled mechanical constructs rendered the costly colossus all but obsolete. Necrotechs worked to bend the purely technological cortex to their will for the first Helljack. Their designs were influenced during the time of the sighting of the mysterious Deathjack, the apparent creation of some half-mad mainland necromancer. All attempts to root out the origins of this fell machine or the nature of its construction techniques failed. Still, the shape and lines and singular machine inspired the construct that would eventually become Slayers, Reapers, and other Helljacks. As Torok inexorably prepares for the next stage of his war against his treacherous offspring, the armies of Cryx spread across the mainland, marshaled by Lich Lords specifically tasked as generals. A recent development. Numerous Cryxian spies seated throughout the mainland provided key information and helped coordinate surprise attacks. The Lich Lords remaining in Cryx support the undead armies with continuous industry and research. Even those liches involved in more esoteric occult research occasionally unearth innovations which new weapons can be created. If the mortals of the mainland had any idea of the complex unholy machinations being unleashed against them, they would immediately set aside their differences and unite to defy Cryx. Thanks to the tendrils growing from many long-buried seeds, Lord Torok and his Lich Lords have carefully orchestrated their plans to ensure that the squabbling nations remain locked in strife, and therefore cannot interfere with their deeper purposes. And we have a little side note here, the Church of Torok. The Dragonfather dwells in a great citadel ornamented with metal spires resembling grappling claws. Beneath lies the Black Temple, the center of Torok's worship, where his undead clergy gather in the direction of the Lich Lord Divinitus to chant obseant to the self-appointed god of Cain. Mainland faiths do not accept Torok's claim to divinity, but it is an unquestioned fact in the island empire, and suggest otherwise is to invite the retaliation of the merciless blighted priest of the Church of Torok. The greatest of Torok's clerics are undead, but those who still live are horribly rotted from their nearness to the Dragonfather. Rumors suggest that may even receive a special communion, a solution containing Torok's own blood. They consider their blighted affliction a blessing and savor the revulsion it evokes in those dragged before them. The aura of their blight is strong enough to kill mortals on extended exposure, so the priests endure the company of other living creatures only for short periods of time. All living priests consider their exalted wanings a necessary step before the immortal undeath they seek as reward for faithful service. Shortly before death, they are taught the sacred language of Lord Torok, a tongue almost unknown outside the dragons. The liches and other sentient dead who rule the church spend their existence praising Torok and ensuring others do the same. They share their visions of a lifeless world populated only by those who have transcended death and who are utterly bound to their master's will. They mutter prayers to his majesty and tend to their diseased flocks, sacrificing souls to their master in holy adulation. Most priests dwell within the Cryxian Empire, but some choose to establish small, covert cults on the mainland to spread the word of the Dragonfather. Lich Lord Divinitus considers the few cults of Torok among the Iron Kingdoms an interesting experiment. They might help prepare the way for the acceptance of Torok's inevitable victory over all life. But even if not, they are a convenient source of cadavers and spiritual energy. Well, that's a little dark, but it is Torok, and he is the technical, I imagine, god of the Nightmare Empire, which is interesting that he has not ascended to the Arcane, or able to ascend to the Arcane, which creates an interesting thing. Maybe because his followers aren't living, or at least most of his followers aren't living. Yeah, I suppose we'll get into that a little bit later as we kind of develop what Torok is exactly, because he is a dragon, we know that. And he likes to be seen as a god, we know that. But he does have offspring that are not really seen as gods. I don't know. It's an interesting factoid there. But let's get back to the reading. The 12 Lich Lords. The armies of the Cryx are led by a dozen powerful and virtually immortal undead generals capable of long-term planning and the scope impossible for mortal minds to comprehend. These liches are created to do the bidding of Lord Torok, the Dragonfather, though at times their own goals distract them from his purpose. Nonetheless, Torok personally selected each of the Lich Lords to command his armies and govern his empire. Each has held substantial dominion for centuries, some more than a millennium. The first Lich Lords were born of the 12 pirate kings of the old Scarred Islands, who bowed to Lord Torok after he revealed his full power to them at the fortress now known as Dragon's Roost. 2 of the original 14 kings dared defiance: King Thrindrax, whom Captain Rengrave of the Archamentus served as vassal in life, the King Morcraig, who fled to his castle thinking he could defend himself from the Dragonfather. Both were annihilated and their souls bound to endless torment, while the 12 who bowed were rewarded with immortality to serve as the overlords of Torok's new empire. The domains of the Lich Lords have evolved and changed over time in keeping with the needs of the empire. Even as Torok spread his blight across the island, his new generals and acolytes set about transforming the scattered land of the 14 petty fiefdoms into a single kingdom sworn to their dragon god. The last 16 centuries have taken its toll upon the Lich Lords, and fewer than half of the original 12 remain. Some have fallen to outside forces, others have succumbed to scheming peers, their mantles taken up by those who engineered their downfall. Such calculating betrayal is routine in Cryx, where only the brilliant and strong enough to retain their position do so. Torok's commandments forbid the Lich Lords from openly warring with one another. However, a direct strife would interfere with the great work of finding and delivering his progeny. Within the last 30 years, the Dragonfather's schemes reached a critical point, and now Cryxian forces are active across the mainland in unprecedented concentration. These armies, called incursions, were once the responsibility of Lich Lord Diamortis and Terminus, who orchestrated their efforts from a distance and remained amid the fleets. What mainlanders referred to as the Scarred Invasion was planned by these 2 Lich Lords as a series of attacks on enemy shores and coastal towns to disguise the movement of incursions into the interior. Diamortis relied heavily upon powerful vassals like the Iron Lich Asphyxius to direct these more enduring operations deeper inside the continent. Even before destroying his master, Asphyxius was considered by many in Cryx to be all but an unrecognizable 13th Lich Lord. After triumphing over Diamortis, Asphyxius replaced his old master and is now the equal to Lich Lord Terminus. Both are now permanently stationed alongside their incursions deep inland to advance Cryxian interests. Lich Lord Venethrax, charged with acquiring Draconic lore, is the authority on Toric's children and Draconic blight. He is the most recent dispatched Lich Lord to arrive on the mainland, there to initiate the operations directly related to the findings and securing other dragons for Toric. His arrival is a response to the perceived change in the stalemate among dragons. These three Lich Lords are presently the commanding generals of the Dragon Lord's armies on the continent. Lich Lord Scrupulous is technically a fourth military leader as he commands the Cryxian army kept in reserve. He supports the incursions on the mainland with his sizable stockpile of thralls, weapons, and necrotite. Scrupulous also commands the Nightmare Empire's garrison and fortresses, and ensures the readiness against direct counterattacks. This Lich Lord coordinates his efforts with those of Terminus' fleet to ensure the steady stream of reinforcements reaches the mainland. Asphyxius has mitigated the urgency of this resupply with his recent efforts to create an autonomous war industry beneath the Thornwood. When the armies of Cryx last marched to war at full strength, it was against the Orgoth in their final bastion at Dreher Drakenrung. At the height of the conflict, Orgoth war witches obliterated the city. The conflagration destroyed 3 of the Lich Lords and reduced 2 others, Tenebrous and Fulminous, to spectral shadows. Though their physical potency was diminished, their new state heightened their ability to perceive and manipulate necromancy, and they are now the Dragonfather's reigning experts on occult lore and esoteric experiments. As Orgoth's secret became part of the Cryxian occult knowledge, Toric elevated new Lich Lords to replace the fallen, Terminus, Thalasina, and Angoris. Thalasina was chosen to steer the affairs of human kingdoms, a task complementing Malethrak's intelligence gathering. Few mortals could ever hope to understand Thalasina's near prescient and subtle scheming. She has quietly become one of the most influential beings in Western Imoran. Toric's draconic mind has difficulty distinguishing the petty lives of mortal rulers, given they die and are replaced so frequently, and he relies heavily on Thalasina's subtle manipulations and the agents who report to her of those courts. Of the Lich Lord's dwellings in Skell, Angoris and Divinitus oversee the treasury and Toric's cult. Respectively, they rarely leave the city. Angoris' agents collect tithes taken from the pirate fleets and the mortal inhabitants of Cryx, and he oversees the tabulations of other significant resources such as the accumulated necrotite. Divinitus perhaps spends more time in Toric's presence than any other lord, directing the Dragonfather's enigmatic priesthood. Lich Lord Corapiro controls the archives of Skell, a library of inestimable worth that includes troves of stolen and accumulated lore, with many tombs thought on the mainland to have been lost forever. What it contains on the Orgoth in particular is beyond compare. The other Lich Lords must stay in Curapiro's good graces if they desire access to this information. Until recently, Cryxian military production was overseen by one of the original Lich Lords, Morbus. He ventured to the mainland in 608 AR to inspect and take control of a vast necrophorium established by Asphyxius, and to ensure that Venethrax received what he needed for his vital missions, and was destroyed in ambush under which many Lich Lords consider suspicious circumstances. Investigation into the matter is underway, and the position remains vacant. It will likely be some time before Toric decides upon a proper replacement, and this position will inevitably be subject to political lobbying by various Lich Lords and their subordinates. In the meantime, Asphyxius has more or less assumed control of Morbus's domain, albeit focused on his own local industry. The balance of Morbus's responsibility and Cryx are being handled by subordinates trained by Master Necrotech Mortenebra, and she has reached out from the mainland to provide them guidance. Some of these subordinates have been co-opted by Lich Lord Scopulus, who may make a bid to broaden his purview to better consolidate the strength of his reserve army. And then we have a little side note here that goes over one of the armies that is in the Thornwood, called the Death Below, the Thornwood Central Necrofactorium. We're going to go over leadership first because, well, we might as well. Of course, this is ran by Lich Lord Asphyxius, as we've seen. Wraith Witch Denegra, his subordinate. Master Necrotech Mortenebra. The Wither Shadow Combine. Scarlock Caligara. Scarlock Darelis. Cephalax Overlord Liaison, Hiraximor, and then the assets. Thousands of Mechanic Thralls, of course, all of those numbers change on the daily. 200 Stitch Thralls, 60 Necrosurgeons and Necrotechs, 200 Helljacks, 350 Bonejacks, Cephalax and Drudge Slaves, because I guess Asphyxius has a agreement with them in their underground caverns. And then materials for thousands of Bonejacks, Helljacks, Thralls, and other constructs. And I imagine, if he is found, or depending on when we read this, I imagine the Iron Kingdoms would probably want to handle this right away and kind of in their squabbling, because that is a lot of undead right there in Thornwood, right between Kodor and Signar. So, but let's read the description. Asphyxius has been overseeing the construction of numerous production hubs beneath the Thornwood to expand Cryx's wartime production on the mainland. The first and largest is the Necrofactoriums he controls directly, and it also serves as his base of operations. This facility is truly an enormous collection of hewn and natural caverns connected by the ever-expanding series of tunnels. It is here, far from prying human eyes, the heart of Cryx's new army beats its relentless pulse. With each passing day, great numbers of thralls, helljacks, and even more terrible weapons are constructed and readied for war. Asphyxius is content to leave daily oversight to the industrial facilities to his Scarlock and Master Necrotechs, Mortenebra, who supervises the senior Necrotechs. The Lich Lord regularly inspects the underground compounds, but increasingly relies on his subordinates while he marshals the armies of the Dragonfather and furthers his complex schemes. Mortenebra endlessly haunts the vast factories and workshops, inspecting and modifying assembly lines and helljacks. She has delegated responsibility to a number of her favored Necrotechs, each of whom is responsible for specific portions of the facilities. Integral to Mortenebra's work is overseeing the ongoing expansion of factory elements and creating adequate defenses for them. Duties of senior Necrotechs range from managing a vast pits filled with corpses and other raw material to producing the most delicate mechanical components. Expansion of these facilities has been aided tremendously by a large number of Cephalax and their surgically altered slaves of strange creatures rely upon for their labor. Several of these sinister Cephalax's overlords have established laboratories and surgical rooms, sometimes in conjunction with Necrotechs. Asphyxius demands that each of these Necrofactoriums be as self-sufficient as possible. This is supported by the considerable army attached to the central facility, allowing it both to defend itself without relying on committed incursion forces and to acquire necessary outside material. Mortenebra is loath to leave her endless work, but her project sometimes requires specific components or body parts that are not predictably available. In such cases, she launches precision attacks against carefully chosen targets, drawing from her hordes of Mechanothralls, Necrosurgeons, and Helljacks to complete the gruesome task at hand. And I imagine this army would be terrifying if you just kind of stumbled upon it. A huge legion of thousands of undead and all of their Helljacks and Bonejacks, all just, ready there for interlopers and about to launch an actual assault on the Iron Kingdoms. But let's get back to reading so we can finish this guy out. The Hierarchy of the Dead. The hierarchy of Cryx is a simple pyramid with Lord Torok at its apex, so far beyond others in power and authority that he is more god than sovereign. Below Torok are the Lich Lords, each a relative monarch with near absolute authority over his or her respective domains. Serving the Lich Lord in vital capacities are individuals with singular power. Field commanders and overseers as varied as they are resourceful. Iron Liches, necromancers, potent sentient dead, and other stranger vassals. The individuals at this level are afforded tremendous latitude in how they serve Torok, and many of them put into motion complicated schemes to advance their own ambitions. The most effective and ruthless of those have sometimes risen to become Lich Lords themselves, a common goal for many of Cryx's subordinate leaders. Lich Lords are ever watchful of their vassals, knowing inattention can all too quickly lead to their own displacement. Warcasters of Cryx, both living and dead, invariably rise to special prominence by virtue of their invaluable talents as battlefield leaders. They transcend the ordinary limits of station to command forces as large as their strength and cunning can demand. Their stature can sometimes make them willful and difficult to predict. However, this spark is vital to their battlefield success and is so rarely quashed entirely. The most powerful remaining vassals are those warlords who have risen through the ranks by their wits, prowess, and personal power. Some, like Gerlach Slaughterborn and Darag Wrath, are living champions who have proven themselves in countless conflicts. Others, like Bane Lord Tartarus and Captain Rengrave, are particularly powerful souls bound in eternal service who use their unique abilities to command specific undead forces. Although the vast majority of Cryxian forces are thralls and necromechanical horrors, the nation also fields a host of fearsome living soldiers. Only two groups of mortals are accorded any real respect by their undead masters, the Satixes and the War Witches. The cruel women from the island of Satix were blighted a millennia ago by the blood of the dying dragon Shatsks that rained down while Lord Torok consumed its ethank. The people of Satix were already immersed in the culture of sacrifice and blood ritual when the blight fell upon them. The men withered away and the women were transformed, their minds embracing an even greater cruelty. When the Dragonfather appeared to the survivors, their queen immediately prostrated herself before their new god. The Satixes have since served Torok as consummate reaver witches and raiders. The Orgoth annihilated themselves when Torok's armies marched upon the city of Drer Drakenrug, but not as completely as they had hoped. A handful of war witches survived and were captured. Given the choice of cooperating or having their secrets necromantically ripped from their bones, the survivors shared their occult traditions with Cryx. Within a few centuries, what little remained of Orgoth culture has been subsumed by Cryx, and his new war witch tradition has produced some of the most powerful mortals ever to serve the Nightmare Empire. And looks like we have a little side reading here. The Cephalax, or however you want to pronounce it. We call him Cephalix, because that's how it sounds. It is not known whether Lich Lord Asphyxius found the Cephalix as he established his operations below the Thornwood, or if their presence drew him there in the first place. Certainly the Iron Lich was the first of Torok's servants to contact the enigmatic race. That Asphyxius was able to strike a deal with the Cephalix is significant in itself, as they have never been designed to communicate with other species. The creatures are emotionless, even by the empty standards of the undead, and exactly what Asphyxius promised them in return for their aid remains a mystery. Perhaps part of the bargain was mortals for their own use. Sometimes Cephalix accompany Cryxian forces into battle, after which the strange beings claim a portion of enemy survivors. Cryx's shadowy alliance with the Cephalix has given them access to massive underground caverns and a network of tunnels perfectly suited for their needs. The huge warren connects caves excavated by the Cephalix with ancient burial rites and even sunken portions of lost empires of Mord. In addition, the two groups have crafted shared facilities for their depraved use. Yes, and in comparison between the two of Cryx and Cephalix, honestly, they're both pretty nightmare species. Although one's very much undead and the other one is very much body horror. Because at least the Cryx use machines compared to the Cephalix, who use living tissue of humans that have been greatly experimented on. I believe you'll see quite a bit of very similar things used by the Orgoth today. But let's continue reading so we can get this thing cleared out. The incursion armies. Over the last 20 years, Cryxian incursion forces have successfully penetrated the mainland and established secret bases in a number of remote wilderness locations. Most significantly, Singnar's Wormwall Mountains and Kodor's Thornwood Forest. Underground tunnels, whether naturally occurring or manually excavated, are the favored sites of these bases. With these, Cryx have begun to establish the infrastructure for unlimited necrotechnological fabrication, as essential part of their insidious campaign of conquest. Cryx has located most such facilities near places of slaughter where the necrotite can be mined to fuel their war industry, and the hidden mining rigs often accompany the necrofactoriums. The majority of the materials used in the craft thralls are stolen from forgotten graves and fresh battlefields. The ancient dead are used to produce banes and scarlocks, while fresher corpses are reanimated to bile thralls and mechanothralls. Few major engagements between the Iron Kingdoms go unnoticed by Cryxian agents. They descend upon battlefields like carrion birds, stripping the carnage of corpses, mechanica, and any other potentially useful salvage. Though relatively small, Cryx's spy network includes contacts among the governments of all mainland nations. Many of these informants do not understand the end results of their efforts, willfully ignorant of their patrons and focused only on the wealth they earn by providing seemingly trivial information. In the aggregate, this data allows Cryx to follow troop movements and subtly influence battles to occur in places convenient to the Nightmare Empire. Other undead minions scour the continent for lost artifacts and lore, or Turok's hated spawn. In some cases, these creatures are left unsupervised for years to be collected later when they uncover obscure objects or useful intelligence. All these assets work to extend Cryx's hold on the mainland, often with no awareness of a larger picture. Several sizable necrofactoriums beneath the Thornwood comprise the production center for the mainland war effort. Combined, this hub is second in size only to the great black iron factories of Skell. Far beneath the earth, 1,000 necrotite furnaces burn, though only trickles of smoke escape between the trees. The Khadorns, who falsely believe they control this region, fear to venture into the heart of Thornwood, where whole patrols have been known to vanish in the night. Asphyxius created and controls this network, but Master Necrotech Mertenbra oversees the operational details. Her flawless machine logic has already exponentially increased production of these facilities, which are equal part factory and surgical theater. Vast numbers of specially crafted thralls endlessly assemble thralls and helljacks as the roar of unwholesome machinery eclipses the screams of living victims. Mortals dragged into this abyss for vivisection spend their last moments breathing the nauseating miasma of smoke, poison, and vaporized blood, all the while lit by the green flame of necrotite-powered forges. In shockingly few years, Cryx has insinuated a horrific new tendrils of their empires into the heart of the Western Imoran. While the mortal nations are preoccupied with their borders and the petty wars, Cryx quietly spreads like cancer just beneath the surface. The fleets of the Cryxian Navy have served as the face of Nightmare Empire for hundreds of years, with an extensive but desperate armada arising from several distinct scarred island pirate forces. Cryx is now one of the premier naval powers in Western Imoran. For centuries, Lich Lord Terminus had oversight of the Cryxian fleets. Since taking charge of the armies of the incursion, however, he has granted full command to Scar Ravenmane, recognizing her fearsome skill and unwavering loyalty to the Dragonfather. This decision unleashed the full fury of Cryx's naval power upon Western seaboard, whose ports are now battered with punishing frequency not seen since the Scarred invasion of Vinter Rathorn's rule. These attacks have ranged as far north as Kodor's farthest frozen ports and intruded across heavily patrolled Gulf of Signar, even into the shores of Protectorate of Menoth. The dark iron heart of the Cryxian Navy is a dreadful black fleet. The mere sight of these black ships is regarded as a sign of imminent and certain doom. They literally bring their own weather, with unearthly winds to fill their sails and chilling fogs to conceal their approach. Derived from closely guarded secrets stolen from the Orgoth, these ships are more than equal to most powerful vessels of the mortal navies, among which only a modern iron hull is able to stand against them. They are constructed in Dreadsmouth under the supervision of Master Shipwright Cress Sarat, who answers to Lord Captain Doravinia Vrace, Master of Dragmouth and former vassal of Lord Lich Morbus, who inherited this responsibility from Lich Lord Terminus, who laid the foundation for the original fleet. Skard leads this fleet directly, alongside the notable captains of the other flagships that are her immediate escort. Satixes make up a large portion of the black ship crews, officers, and captains than in the other fleets. In addition to being among the most formidable warships ever created, black ships have the capacity to carry a large number of soldiers, helljacks, and other supplies for invasion forces. The Black Fleet has rarely been released in full force, and Manon admirals often underestimate its size. They view Cryx's nautical strength through the skewed lens of encounters with the chaotic mortal pirate fleet. The Ghost Fleet is the smallest of the Cryxian fleets, its numbers fluctuating with the vagaries of war. Though not quite as fast or deadly as black ships, the spectral flotilla, frigates, and few larger ships have their own advantages. They are pushed by unseen winds, regenerate from damage sustained with unnatural alacrity, and are crewed by seemingly indestructible sentient spirits rather than living men. All but the most powerful mortal fleets turn sail at the first sight of one of these ghastly vessels looming ahead. Green flames eternally flickering along the decks, rigged and crewed. Those crews are beholden to Captain Rengrave, who has a distinction of being Torok's first vassal and Cryx's first citizen. His funeral flagship, Artementus, an enormous blackened dirge mass, is the most ancient ship sailing in the Meridius. To be boarded by a revenant is to face eternal torment, and many soldiers choose to end their lives rather than endure that terrible fate. A diverse group mostly made up of sailing vessels liberated from other nations, the pirate fleet is the largest but most loosely ordered of Cryx's fleets. Indeed, it operates more as a collection of fleets than a single cohesive group. These vessels include a large number of living crewmen, primarily human scarred islanders, but they also employ Trollken, Ogrun, and Satixes. The larger number of Satixes are found on the elite vessels called the Ixaria Raiders, led by Ixaria Wraithblade, who has been delegated oversight of an entire pirate fleet. Ixaria has the direct ear of Scar Ravenmane, and the other commanders obey her accordingly, if not always swiftly or predictably. In addition to being used to mount chaotic attacks on mainland shippings for plunder, these ships have long been involved in smuggling trade, the only true commerce between Cryx and the mainland. Their ability to find even marginal welcome at smugglers' ports and seedy pirate dens has made them a valued asset to Cryxian intelligence. Though used primarily to support and diversion, these fleets are battle-tested and ready to answer the call to action. Because its numerous vessels are crewed by willful and bloodthirsty scoundrels of volatile temperament, the pirate fleet has historically been difficult to control and coordinate. Recent efforts of Ixaria on Scar's orders have helped to bring these captains more in line and ensure their obedience. The Blood Witches have learned that they may do as they please until Ixaria or Scar calls upon them. Cryx otherwise employs these ships to distract naval forces, while the Black Fleet or the Ghost Fleet engages higher priority targets. Though the various Cryxian fleets are made up of desperate and sometimes mutually hostile crews, they sometimes come together for raids against key targets. The terrifying entities that crew these vessels are accompanied by ambitious helljacks like the Leviathan or the Horror, which can be dropped into the water before the ship lands and arise from the depths and terrorize coastal defenders. Raiding tactics usually involve routing panicked enemies through sheer press of numbers. It may not be subtle, but the technique is undeniably effective. And then we got one more thing to read on part 1 of this before we go over to part 2. And it is a army build of the Black Fleet. And let's start with the leadership since we did that last time. Leadership, flagships. Warcaster, Scar, Ravenmane. Flagship captains, Anathesius, Dawnblood, Earcutter, Redtide, and Volumuk. Assets include 6,000 Satixes, 20,000 Thralls, 1,800 Black Ogrun Pirates, 1,000 Revenants, 100 plus Necrotechs, Scarlocks, and Wraiths, 150 Helljacks, Horrors, Leviathans, Reapers, Seethers, and Bonejacks, all chassis, hundreds of them. And their slogan, by the Dead Sea, a Blood Dawn, and Watery Grave. Scar Ravenmane has opened up a warfront 2,000 miles wide along the western coast as she conducts unrelenting raids and strikes. From her flagship, the Widower, she coordinates the whole of the Cryxian Navy as well as directly commanding the dreaded Black Fleet. The decks of these terrifying black ships are crammed with raiding parties eager to plunder mainland villages and shipping. Even a single black ship is enough to send groups of lesser vessels fleeing at full sail towards the nearest fortress. Seeing a line of them coming over the horizon can drive hardened naval officers to madness. The Widower is directly accompanied by the black ships Ill Tidings, Blood Tempest, Maledictor, Branding Iron, and Exhumation. The first 3 of these are commanded by Scar's favored Satix's captains. Satix Raiders and Blood Witches generally form the core of Scar's raiding forces, and each is handpicked and loyal to the Pirate Queen. The Maledictor boast a large number of savage black ogrins who rejoice in capture of ships and slaughter of their defenders. Their captain is Jorvac Earcutter, a slave runner whose name brings dread even in ports where flesh trade is tacitly condoned, such as Wake Isle of Five Fingers. He and his ogrins are not always on friendly terms with the scornful Satixes, but they come an equitable arrangement. The branding iron is specially outfitted to serve as a mobile helljack and bonejack armory, complete with necrotex and ample supplies of necrotite. The soldiers and warjacks form the ships are frequently deployed in major coastal attacks. The Exhumation is a charnel slaughterhouse ship filled with corpses, thralls, and reanimation tools. Scar attained her preeminence among the Black Fleet by first demonstrating her sovereignty over the Satixes. Dozens of rival dead at her hand before the Satixes recognized her as their queen and master. It was then simple enough to quell any rivals among the unsavory human, Trollkin, and Ogren of the pirate fleet. Since then, she has led countless raids, including the one that utterly destroyed the Signaran coastal town of Ingrain. The specific reasons behind the Black Fleet's attack are diverse, as every raid is part of a greater plan. The Black Pirates plunder not for personal gain, but rather to garner assets for war. These vary from supplies of blasting powder otherwise unavailable to Cryx to captives of interest, either as needed by Cryx necromancers or for inculcation into occult training and conditioning. I remember there is a set of twin warcasters, and one of them may be working for the Cryx while the other works for the warcaster that was part of a coastal town, but we'll get to that when we get to the Cryx as a whole. Scar was personally involved in one of the largest sea battles against the Signar Navy, in the Windwatcher's Passage in 588 AR, where she dealt a grievous defeat to the forces sent from Westwatch. This opening allowed the Widower and other ships to raid a number of villages throughout the Gulf of Middlebank. The slaughter and pillaging were so brutal that none dare settle in the area today. More recently, in late 606 AR, she led an overwhelming attack at Port of Vladivar, home of the Ghadoran Navy. Her fleet crippled or captured many of the northern nation's finest warships, dealt a staggering blow to its naval strength, and inflicted considerable casualties and damage to the city. The strike on Port Vladivar coincided with other Cryxian movements further inland, sowing terror and uncertainty across Kodor as word of their fleet's defeat spread. Alright, and that will do it for part 1 of the Cryxian history. I'm going to plunder all of the archives to find any additional information that expands on any of this or any of the things that they're doing. So what we have discovered in our reading is the Cryx are crazy good at naval battles, and they do have a full naval fleet. They are literally picking targets of different port cities across the Iron Kingdoms as diversionary tactics to reach further into the mainland. And of course, as we read, they do have some standalone necrofactoriums already on the mainland, pumping out thousands and thousands of undead and abominations and warjacks that serve their purpose. So yeah, they are they are definitely a great diversionary army of the Iron Kingdoms. And for anybody that does not know or does not expect them to be as large or as organized as they are, I imagine for all of the living that is going to be a huge issue. But now I'm very curious on what the Cryx did during the Infernal's invasion, because, well, I imagine one's fighting for souls, one's fighting for bodies, but, you know, the Cryx like souls too, so I don't know. But we will get to that reading when we get to that reading. Also, I would like to thank everybody for checking us out today. If you could hit that like button and please comment. I always love comments. Tell me what your favorite Cryx army is, or your favorite warcaster in their expanded universe as well. We always love hearing about your guys' opinion. Also, if you could please share this with your friends and fellow gamers alike. That does help keep the class size growing and helps keep this steam train rolling along. Also, as mentioned in a previous note, we are putting together a Patreon, so if any of you are excited about that, please hit that like button. Please comment below. Let me know We're going to try to give you guys as much stuff as we can, because, well, we do this every week, and we post things every day. So I imagine we could probably find all sorts of stuff to give any members who want to join our Patreon. Also, thank you again for Steamforge Games for letting us continue to read your fantastic lore, and thank you Privateer Press as well for creating a lot of this older lore that we are reading today. Without further ado, class dismissed.